Morning, Rover fans, and welcome to another edition of Shop Fitter's Disease. It's my own ailment and working on this stupid Land Rover back here. I had this thing for about 30 years, as you know from previous podcasts. And what we're trying to do today is to repair the Smith's heater. Now, all these Land Rovers from 1969 on through the Series 3s and probably before, had these things, these heaters called Smith's heaters, and they consisted of a blower housing and a matrix, or the place where the core sits, right here in the bulkhead. And these things were notoriously underpowered. You could ride around in your Rover for an hour and you'd still freeze to death. Most people had two speeds, but most people kept them on high, and that still wasn't enough to keep you warm. And they were called shin burners because most of the heat they put out came right through here on your shin. And it was really hot there, but the rest of you, well, it wasn't. So we're going to work on that, and I'll show you how we uh, rebuilt the blower housing, repair some rusty holes in it in a very unique way, and put the whole thing back together again. And it's going to blow out a lot more air, I guarantee you.
So, say you have one of these beasts under your bonnet and it looks like this. It's pretty ugly. They've rusted away nicely and mounted to the bulkhead. The matrix is on the right, the blower obviously is on the left, and connected with that fine piece of PVC hose. These stills were taken months apart. Um, You can see I've done some touch-up work on the bulkhead there, but the Smith's heater is well corroded. And this is what it could look like in brand spanking new, well, pretty much the new shape. These are taken after I finished the process that I'll outline to you here. Okay, I put together this quick list of things to look for. Going down here, rivets, a rivet gun. There are 5 rivets, 2 that hold the resistor in place and 3 that hold the motor in place in the blower housing, and you'll need to put those back in. The other stuff is fairly straightforward. I used paint stripper to take the paint off of all these things, and then I also used this rust remover, which you'll see in a little bit in here. And the other thing down at the bottom is the Bondo and the wire mesh, and you'll get a pretty good idea in a minute why I needed that. So a series of looks at the blower housing and motor attached. I took everything apart or off the bulkhead, and you can see the bracket that mounts it on the bottom. You can see the blower motor and the green and brown wires, which go to the rheostat, the resistor in the blower output. There's a back shot of it. You can see again that the leg or bracket is rusted out and removed. And something in the front, and you see the rheostat, or I keep calling it rheostat, resistor inside. Um, and finally, the other side, you see the bad stuff, and that's the big hole in the housing that I was troubled. I didn't know how I was going to fix that since they're not available, and you can see a little closer on how much damage there was that it rusted away entirely. Here's a close-up of the resistor inside the blower and the resistor with the mouse wheel, or the hamster wheel as they like to call it. Anyway, that's a pretty good look at what's inside, and there is the resistor removed. Again, that's held in by two rivets that you'll have to drill out in order to get it out of there before you start rebuilding the blower housing. So here's the motor, and again another shot of the great shape of the blower housing and how much it had rusted away. I'd cleaned it up here at this point with a wire brush and taken off all. So this thing literally crumbled and fell apart at this point. I told you I removed the brackets from the one side, and all of that rusted metal is what I was taking out. And you can see all the other holes around the side where it had just rusted through. I did take a wire brush and sandpaper and took off all the rust that I could, both inside and out. It There's some captive nuts on one side that just the plate that held the back in had rusted away. You can see the one down in the one still left down in the bottom. But the big question was what to do with this housing. Since you can't buy these anymore, you can buy a variety of blowers in the aftermarket. I'll put a couple of pictures of those in here. But I wanted to keep this looking as original as possible and keep the Smith's blower as ineffective as it is in place. So some people on the internet groups suggested I just rivet on pieces of coffee can. Actually, I heard that, which might have worked. I heard other things, suggestions as well, blower motors for boats and uh, I just, again, it seemed like a lot of unnecessary work, but as it turned out, I put a lot of unnecessary work into it anyway. So here's what I did. I went out and got some Bondo, and because the hole is so big, I had to put wire mesh in the back of the inside of the blower housing to get the Bondo, give the Bondo some base to stick to. Bondo is available in any auto parts store as well as wire mesh, and it's really inexpensive. I'd never worked with it before, but it's easy to work with. Requires a little bit of sanding once you get it in, get it everything in there. But I'll show you in a minute. So a brief intermission in the action here. I'm going to show you what I did to get a lot of the paint off and get these things prepped for painting.
So I just finished using this stuff. It's pretty good. Put it in a big bucket here. The water looks a little rancid, but the stuff really works. Let me show you what it's done. I put this heater cooler in there, heater core cover. It took all the paint right off of it. Pretty cool. And I also stripped this heater wheel down, and it took a lot of stripping, but I think it's going to paint okay. And this is the other side of the heater core box. It spent overnight in that stripper. It works pretty good. And the supports for the heater. That's the left one.
Okay, here's the blower housing after I bondoed over that big hole, which is not visible anymore. It took me a couple coats of this with that wire mesh in the background. I held that into the backside and then applied the Bondo so it would adhere. It worked pretty good after I sanded it down a couple of times and smoothed it out. It's still rough, but it's a lot better than it was. Okay, real quick before I move on to the disassembly and reassembly of the motor housing and motor. This is one of the options that someone pointed out to me on the internet, and there are these low voltage blowers around. You can find them, spend a little bit of money for them, and they have a housing that's plastic and everything. I assume would work okay. It's just beyond my financial reach. And here's a new motor that is offered by Rovers North. But again, it's not the housing itself, but it's an entirely new blower motor for the Smith's heater made by an aftermarket manufacturer. And I assume again that this would work fine, but I didn't want to spend the dollars on it. And as it turned out, the resistor and the mouse wheel and everything wasn't good enough shape to go ahead and put in this beast. So I put the motor, I extracted it from the housing. You can see where I drilled out the 3 rivets, and there's a rubber bushing that's still in place there. And put this up on the bench and started to disassemble it. When you start to take the long bolts out, you may find these nuts on the end kind of rusted and require some WD-40 to loosen them up. Once you slide those out, get those bolts and nuts out of there, the end cover will come off of the carrier housing. And this, you see uh, the shaft there with the brushes. It's all pretty straightforward for an electric motor, and nothing was really rusted inside. It was in pretty good shape. It just required a little bit of lubrication. And again, you have to be kind of careful when you pull these wires out of the grommets and try to make sense where everything goes. But it came apart nicely. There are a lot of washers inside that you try to save in the order that they go back in. And I'll show you a couple other tricks too. And it was time for some primer and a nice trip to the paint box. And a final coat of Rust-Oleum black was put on everything.
So here's an after shot of the fan housing after I've painted it, and you can see this is where the rusted through part was, and I took the Bondo, put it in here, sanded it down and painted it, and you can see inside, perhaps, yeah, I'll turn it around this way, the back side of the Bondo. I'm gonna have to file some of that down, I think, to make sure the fan doesn't hit it, but it's pretty solid, and there are these captive bolts on either side, or captive nuts on either side. I'm going to have to go ahead and drill a hole here to make another captive, right here, another captive nut for the brackets that hold this onto the bulkhead.
The resistor was in pretty good shape, so I just went ahead and put that back in and attached it with rivets, and then put the painted brackets back on the bottom of the blower housing.
Okay, if you've ever reassembled or taken apart an electric motor before, you know that there are these carbon brushes that brush against the rotor here, and little wires attached to them. In this case, putting the plastic case on this plastic plate with the carbon brushes here was really tough to do, to pull them back because there are springs in there. So what I did was I manufactured in great detail some fine, I'll show this to you, I bent a paper clip here. If you can see that, there we go. And the paper clip fits in here and it pulls back and holds the spring, and I did one for each side to keep the brush back as I pulled the rotor up through here. It worked quite well, and sort of saved a lot of time and frustration and anguish. Anyway, I'm going to put the case back on the motor now. Okay, I'm putting the star washers back on here, the star lock washers, and then I will tighten down the case, and we're going to do sorry, I keep bumping the camera here, we're going to do a motor run test once I get the squirrel cage or the fan on, and I'll hook up a 12-volt battery and we'll get that so we can show you how it works. I still have to figure out this whole capacitor thing, or excuse me, resistor. I think the resistor is good, but as you may remember from the video when I took this thing apart, the resistor looking a little shabby. I'm going to hook it up anyway and see if it works, and tighten this down good and tight. There we go. And a little music while we go here. There we go. All right, and this thing's to spin freely. Okay, I've got the battery hooked up and I'm going to run some jumper cords up to the wires on the heater and we'll see if it works. Okay, we've got the ground hooked up right here. This is the ground wire to the battery, and I'm going to try this green wire first and we'll see what we get. It's working, look at that. That looks like it must be low speed. All right, let's try the other one. That's high speed.